Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your normal host, Greg Thompson, and tonight I am joined by special guest Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills. Kyle, how we doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Greg. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, appreciate it. Figure, going into the bye week, it's, obviously can be different. And going into the season, I can't lie, I wasn't ecstatic that the Bills had a week 6 bye. It seemed kind of early, 5 games before, 11 games after. That just didn't seem ideal. And now, in the moment after these 5 games and racking up the additional injuries that we saw coming into the game in week 5 and then coming out of the game, now it seems like a godsend. So I can't lie, I'm excited to have this little bit of break, and you seem like the perfect guy to come on and kind of walk us through
I'd like to think I am.
it. And it's funny that we need someone like you. We need an interpreter because in many ways, not just injuries, Sean McDermott is going to share the bare minimum information that he's obligated to give, and he as a baseline assumes that anything could be a competitive advantage. So he's always going to default to what is the minimum I have to tell you. And that can be difficult when it comes to injuries and when it comes to these things. So having someone like you who maybe has learned to interpret McDermottese is a really big benefit.
Absolutely. I can't say I've perfected it, but I can at least roughly translate most of the things, hence why I do what I do.
That's awesome. Before we jump into it, why don't you tell the people a little bit about what you do? I know you work as an injury spotter with some of the folks that we see on Twitter. You go on a lot of the different shows that we hear. Why don't you tell people? I mean, obviously, in the real world, you're a doctor of physical therapy, and obviously do that as a profession. How did you get into this kind of space or this kind of
So,
space?
it all started. Everybody I think knows the Rock Power Report guys, Chris and Drew, and I
Oh
had
yeah.
talked with them on Twitter. This is back 2016, and they were talking about ACLs, and I was in that conversation with them, and they had said, hey, we're looking to get somebody on. And I said, hey, I'm a physical therapist. I know a thing or two about that stuff. So we got talking. I was on the show and played around with the idea for a little bit of, maybe try to do something. Reached out to a few places that I thought maybe I could write for. Didn't really get a whole lot of feedback from that. So I said, heck with this. I'm going to start my own thing. So that's where I started writing things. And I've noticed in the past, since 2017 when I started this to now, my writing's improved greatly. I do appreciate Bills Mafia for sticking with me as I've done this. But, around that time when I started Banged Up Bills too, the pro football doc, Dr. David Chow, had been looking for injury spars because himself had started realizing that, hey, there's something there. Like he would sit on his couch on Sundays and tweet out these injuries and realizing, hey, I can't watch all 16 games or whatever it would be at that time. But if I have people tweeting at me, I can catch the big injuries. So I happen to just catch them on the right day and reach out to them. And, it's a third season working with Dr. Chow. So what happens is on the Bills games, anytime that there's an injury, I'm tweeting at them or direct messaging them and saying, hey, this is what happens, the quarter, this is what I think's going on. And then if it's serious enough, he'll look at it. But, there's players that don't tip the meter. Like Josh Allen's gonna get him to look at things.
Sure.
Devin Singletary maybe. But guys like John Feliciano maybe or Dean Marlowe just, hey, I'll look at it later if I have time. But there's so many different games going on. He's not looking at every single Bills injury. But I try to be thorough and give him as much information as possible. So I do that, and then that parlays into what I do with Banged Up Bills, and then I write for Buffalo Rumblings. I do off-season work for Cover One with the draft stuff with injuries.
Yep.
So I've been pretty busy. I never thought I would be doing something year-round with it, but it's been pretty lucrative. The only thing I haven't gotten is any money yet, but I don't quite do it for money though. So
Believe me, you figure that part out. Let me know. No,
exactly.
it's really exciting. Like I said, I think you do an awesome job, Dr. Chow. I really appreciate his work from a fantasy football standpoint. I do lean on him sometimes, but let's take a look here. And like I said, it's really went from something that we were pretty fortunate at one point to this past week. We brought 6 guys into the game with an injury designation and added 4 or 5 more during the game that kind of scared us a little bit. So why don't we go maybe position group by position group and figure out what's out there that we need to be concerned with or kind of watch out. How's that sound?
I like that idea.
Perfect. So obviously, we're pretty clean at quarterback. It seemed like I know you were very tempered in your approach to everyone with Josh Allen coming back, and that don't read into. And I try to warn people, don't use terms like minor and severe or serious, or that it's really hard to read concussions and how people react, what their symptoms are, and that we've seen people, obviously here we saw multiple folks come back in a pretty brief period of time, 5-6 days in the protocol. We've seen others on 8+ weeks through the concussion protocol. So is there any lingering concern outside of just obviously the risk of getting hit again in a serious manner, or is that we should interpret being released from the concussion protocol means that he is full go and that we should assume he's ready to rock?
How I interpret things is once you're released from concussion protocol, you're totally fine and you're able to play. There's always that concern to get another concussion. I know that's happening with Sterling Shepard, the Giants, right now. He has suffered one early in the preseason or like late regular season opening game there, and then he suffered another one. He self-reported the symptoms from what I read. So he's going to be out for a while because they're watching that. They don't want to have too many concussions in a row. And I think I've been seeing lately, it's like if you get 2 concussions this season, you're done. They just don't want to risk it there. So there's always that risk for any player that gets concussions. I believe it happened to EJ Gaines last year too. Good old favorite Buffalo Bill EJ Gaines. But there's always the concern for them to have that again, but you're not going to hold them out for fear of that, because if you play with fear, or if you hold them out and the possibility that they might hurt themselves again, they say when you play with fear, you're going to get yourself hurt. So
Yeah.
I look at that same approach with the concussions. Like if he's clear, get him out there. If it happens again, that's terrible, but there's not really anything you could have done about that unless you were rushing through a concussion protocol and they weren't ready. But there'd be so many unethical things going on at that point, which there's, protocols in place, A, to prevent against that, and B, it wouldn't happen. That's just simple as that.
And I know we talked through several things. I know that we've spent a great deal of time researching and reading through the material that was out there. The league consciously doesn't give out a great deal of detail on. We were looking, hey, is there a minimum period of time that you have to spend in each stage of the protocol before you can move forward? It seems like the customary element is 24 hours in each stage, but it's not necessarily documented that way. But that seems to be a pretty consistent step, and that it seems like in general, 5 days is about the minimum of when you can be released that we've seen just through people's actions. And then, like I said, it could stretch on well beyond there. So we saw 3 last week with Josh Allen, Patrick DeMarco, and Dean Marlowe all being released at the 5-day mark, and seeming that they checked each of those boxes as they went, came back to 100% cognitive function in the baseline testing they had, and then, like you said, are good to go. And we just need to basically cross our fingers going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I haven't seen anything that says you have to spend a day in each thing, but that's kind of how it is. You don't want to say, you're good enough, because you still want to see how people respond in each of those settings. You want to make sure that they're back to baseline, which is step 1. And you want to make sure that they can tolerate each of the stages that they go through and make sure that they're not going to have a setback. So you try to rush through it could cause more problems than it's going to help. So yeah, the 24 hours isn't a hard and fast rule, but it is allowing them to kind of do the checklist. Okay, you got through this one, good. You go through the next one, good. Let's keep moving along as long as you don't have any symptoms. So no set rule, but that's kind of by default.
All right, well, let's move on to the next position group here with the running backs. We talked about Patrick DeMarco getting released. The only other one there at running back, obviously, is rookie 3rd-round pick Devin Singletary. He's been out with a hamstring injury now and missing multiple games. It seemed like the last 2 games, we kind of had some teasers that maybe he was close, out there doing some pretty significant work in practice, some pretty lathered up pregame workouts, and that I don't blame them. Obviously, going into the last game with a muddy track and a grass field with storms and the bye week facing them, that was a lot of factors as a tiebreaker in my mind. Hamstrings, I think, are one of the toughest injuries to gauge in football. What are your thoughts on where Devin Singletary is now, and do you think it's reasonable to expect him to be out there coming out of the bye week, if based on what we know now?
I think it's very reasonable to expect him back after the bye week. We know that he was very close to playing against the Patriots, and then they held him out. Just maybe he didn't feel right, or we don't know what went in the decision, but we knew he was close according to reports. And then last week he was out again, but we know the field was slick, like you had said. So I believe that the weather was truly the factor into that. And then McDermott was saying the bye week did play a part into his decision making to do that there. They were, 3-1 going in the game. They had the personnel to play. They figured it's not worth it if he can hurt himself on the slick surface there. I believe that if the weather was fine, he would have played and he probably would have been effective. I also went back and looked since McDermott took over in 2017. On average, most of the guys that suffer hamstring are missing 2 and 3 games, give or take. So to see him miss those games isn't outrageous. Once again, go back to E.J. Gaines. I think he was the only one that suffered a hamstring. It seemed like he came back maybe a little early. He suffered a groin and was out longer. So I'm also noticing the guys that do suffer hamstrings aren't sustaining what we call cluster injuries, where one injury translates into another injury later on, or we see them missing multiple games over the course of the season because it's become chronic.
No, it's interesting. I know that'll come up again when we get to another position group, but let's look at the wide receivers. We hadn't really said technically Cole Beasley was on there for ankle. I think that was more veteran rest, but the one that was interesting was Robert Foster was full participant in practice Wednesday and Thursday. It seems like between that in that Thursday practice came down with some kind of groin injury and then was a limited participant Friday, a questionable designation, and then did not dress for the game. That was being question because of obviously Duke Williams' call up and the exciting nature there. What do we know so far about Robert Foster, if anything?
The groin injury itself, I don't know a whole lot. I mean, there hasn't been any video that shows what he did. Every once in a while, we see something that sneaks out. Like I remember Levi Wallace had suffered some type of sprain a few weeks ago during practice, but typically we don't see the injuries come out in practice because obviously teams don't want to reveal what's going on there. So the nature of how he injured the groin, don't know what's going on with that. I know he was dealing with a turf toe during OTAs. He kind of got it better, re-aggravated during training camp. And then he's still obviously dealing with that because that's an injury that also lingers like a lot of some other things. It's one of the few sprains that it's hard to get rid of. Reason being that is because you require your big toe to push off so much when you're running. You run on the balls of your feet, especially when you're sprinting, cutting. So between the turf toe not being able to push off effectively and then the groin, preventing you from cutting effectively, jumping to a lesser extent, just doing everything the football really moves. I don't know whether turf toe and the groin are on the same side or opposite, but either way, you're going to have to compensate. And if your hip and foot are out of the picture or not 100%, your knee's taking the extra brunt of everything. So at some point, you just say, shut him down until he's ready to go. So he's just not good right now. I have a feeling he wasn't going to play. I was right with that. He's one of those guys that he may come off after the bye, and I just don't know whether he's going to be ready for the Miami game or even Eagles game. He might still need some extra time just to get right before he even tries to get back out there and do something.
Interesting. And now another guy in that same camp that for any Bills fans who aren't aware, we actually have a tight end named Tyler Croft. You've never seen him in a Bills uniform, but he is technically on the roster. Now, in hindsight, obviously, it seems like Croft would have been an easy pup candidate, but that he was ready to go. It seemed like he was there, ramping up for practice, and then boom, comes down with an ankle injury, then has now missed the subsequent 3 games. And now is getting to the point where obviously we're hopeful that's there. And I'll speak to the fact that I think that Tyler Croft, from a talent standpoint, is underrated by Bills fans. I think they got a little excited about Sweeney in the preseason. Obviously, everybody's head over heels about Dawson Knox and his highlights. Tyler Croft is a consistent, good performing tight end. I think he's a significant upgrade on Sweeney and is more consistent than Knox, even if he doesn't have the athletic upside that maybe Knox does. I think he's going to add a lot to this team, but I just don't know when to count on him being there. So with what you know of coming out with obviously the reoccurrence of the foot injury that he had surgery on last year, ramping all the way back up, then getting an ankle injury, is this someone that you think we're going to be able to count on, or what are we seeing as his timeline of potentially getting himself back out here?
I think it's somebody we can count on. That's why Brandon Beane signed him in the offseason. When he comes back, I don't think he comes back until he gets a full week of practice in. Every day is full practice. He doesn't have any setbacks, doesn't have any pain. He is able to go 100%, no limitations. When that occurs, I don't know. Low ankle sprains itself, he probably would have played through, but I believe he had suffered a Jones fracture or a refracture because he had the same injury back in Cincinnati last year. He had the same injury again. Sounds like the bone broke or the screw broke. He had to get that replaced and fixed up there. And then his timeline was 3 to 4 months, they had said. He's well past that now. I believe that it would have been 4 months, like around this time right now. So we know that the right foot is most likely fully healed up. They probably didn't want to rush him back because if you have any limitations on the left side, which is where the low ankle sprain is at, that's going to put extra pressure back on the right side. And you might be back to square one. And frankly, I don't think Tyler Kraft wants that. I don't think the front office, coaching staff, anybody wants that. So I think they're going to wait until he's totally 100% healthy in the left leg or left ankle, and then make sure he can do a full week of practice before they even think about getting him out there.
Interesting. And I know that I've heard before with the Jones fracture and with, especially when you get to the surgical repair, that I think I'd heard it with Julian Edelman. It had been discussed with Sammy Watkins. Is there truth that, oftentimes there is a high level of recurrence, and that the second time you get it done with the surgical repair, there's actually a pretty solid recovery of not having it come up again? That it always made me curious of why don't people just skip straight to that if it's so common that you get a second one and then you're good after the surgery. It just always struck me as interesting how people talk about that.
Yeah, that's correct. I haven't really seen too many times where guys are getting third and fourth Jones fractures. I can't say I've looked into every instance exhaustively, but we've seen the big ones: Des Bryant, Julio Jones.
Yeah.
Those guys, they have the second one, Sammy Watkins, that too. And then they're usually good. I know Sammy still has some issues off and on, but he just seems like his body can only handle short bursts of NFL action over the course of the season versus the longer duration. As for everything else that goes into that, they don't want to always do surgery because surgery isn't always the answer. That goes for any injury. You don't want to just go and cut somebody open because, well, that might be the quickest fix. Sometimes it is, like ACLs, there's really no other way around it. Achilles, rotator cuffs, but labrums, but you don't want to have to go cut in because you have to let the body heal up. And then if you cut in, you could be disrupting things. You're introducing the possibility of infection. We saw that in Washington multiple times with Alex Smith, Darius Geis. So anytime you can just do conservative treatment, that's always ideal. And that goes for anything in my world in regards to PT. And then you move to surgical if things don't work out or if you've exhausted all other options.
All right, let's move on to the offensive line group here. This one, we came into the game with Ty Nseki's ankle injury, and then during the game, ended up seeing another ankle injury from Mitch Morse and a concussion from Cody Ford. So I think you've already kind of laid out the concussion protocol idea. We're not going to know until he's cleared. That would be at the earliest for this Miami game. But obviously we won't know that until we hear that he's through each of the stages. But what are your thoughts on the existing ankle injury for Ty Nseki and then what we saw during the game for Mitch Morse?
Okay. With Nsekhe, I did some detective work. So he had definitely suffered a right ankle injury during the Bengals game. He got bull rushed back and really just looks like he stepped hard back on his right foot trying to push forward, and he just tweaked it. He was able to come back in, finish playing the game there. But I think rotating in with Cody Ford has helped him save his body a little bit. So we see him in the Patriots game, and I had to really look for this one. But with about a minute and a half left in the first quarter, he was going through a routine run play. Frank Gore runs up the middle for about 2 yards. Nsekhe falls down, and then unfortunately friendly fire occurs. Deion Dawkins loses his balance, comes stumbling over, steps on Nsekhe's ankle, and you see Nsekhe just jump up like the dead has risen before he falls back down. He was able to play the rest of the game, alternating with Cody Ford. I don't believe his snap count changed at all, but you could definitely tell at times he just wasn't running 100%, but he doesn't need to be running downfield fast because he works in small spaces beyond on the offensive line. So the stepping itself looked like it could have been a high ankle, but it could just be a contusion. I really can't tell what's going on until he comes up after the bye. So if he's still on the injury report with a ankle injury, I'm thinking maybe a mild high ankle because he was able to finish the game. We've seen that happen with Patrick Mahomes this year. He's able to play through the mild high ankle. If he doesn't show up at all, then I'm thinking contusion because, frankly, if you get stepped on with cleats, it's going to hurt like hell. So I don't blame him for missing the Titans game as a result of all that. And we saw the same thing happen with Quentin Spain in the preseason when Frank Gore unfortunately ran over him. So we'll just see what happens. I'm hoping that it's just contusion, but there's always the possibility of the high ankle based off of how the injury occurred.
And I know there were
And
comments that Mitch Morse wasn't too serious, but anything you saw there?
yeah, so with that too, Frank Gore ran up the middle. Whenever the injury occurred, I had to go back and look, but uh, it looked like it kind of like a leg whip injury. And not that it was a traditional leg whip, but Frank Gore ran through. It looked like he kicked Morse as he was falling down. And of course, it's all by accident. But Morse rolled back over. You can see him kind of pause, slowly get up. He's able to play a few more plays, and all of a sudden he just disappears. And you see Feliciano in there play in place of him. And of course, they were saying that Morris was trying to, I think you had said that Bobby Johnson was preventing him from going back out there. Yeah. But Monday, McDermott had said that he was ready to go if they needed it, because we saw the offensive lineman drop like flies. So that's where I think it was more like the leg whip contusion, where he shouldn't have any problems coming off after the bye.
Very good. No, we certainly need him back in there. That's encouraging. On the defensive line, the only one is Trent Murphy, again, coming into concussion protocol. So really just at the mercy of that process, hoping for the best for him. But let's look at the linebackers. So one, coming into the game again, we have Corey Thompson, who has now been out for a pretty extended period of time with his ankle. No participation in practice, no limited, has been declared out very early in each of the weeks. And that obviously that's going on several weeks now. And then during the game, went into the hamstring with Matt Milano. So let's start out with Corey Thompson. What are you aware of there, and what are we looking at a potential time frame?
Well, he was able to play the Bengals game in the first quarter for about 6 special teams plays. They had ruled him, I think it was, did not participate that final practice on Friday before the game. He was questionable. He disappeared after that because it sounded like his ankle couldn't handle it. I couldn't see which ankle was going on. He looked like he was running full speed, but when you're all amped up on adrenaline and just home opener, I would think anybody could probably play through some injury like that. So they reported he had ankle surgery. They didn't put him on IR, which is key, because that indicates that this recovery time will be less than 8 weeks, which will be the time you have to spend on injured reserve. So you're thinking a few weeks. They don't know when he's coming back. I was willing to bet he probably had some type of ankle clean out. There could have been some bone chips, could have been some loose bodies, something that was just impacting his ability to move the ankle around effectively. I don't know what would have led to that in the first place, but I'm thinking he might come back after the bye. If he does, he might be limited, might be questionable. This has been, 3 weeks at the bye. He could come back within, I think, the next 2 games, just depending on how he responds to the rehab.
No, that makes sense. And obviously, this is going to come up in certainly the player we're about to talk about, but I can't blame the team for taking a conservative approach, having the bye week, and then the first game back is Miami. You can't take any team in the NFL for granted. You have to show up and play the game. But that's why the Bills built the depth that they did. If we have anyone that we're remotely concerned about, sitting them out for a home game against Miami is the one that you're going to lean conservative and going to try to hold that to that point. We got a good question in the chat from Joe, and going through, why do people refer to hamstring injuries as so tricky? If you can speak to that a little bit, and then maybe talk about where that leads us to why we should be cautious in our expectation for Matt Milano.
Okay. Hamstrings are tricky because they cross 2 joints. So they connect up at the bottom of the butt on the ischial tuberosity, and then they connect down to the tibia behind the knee, and that helps out the knee flexion. So you're looking at hip extension and knee flexion. I always have to make sure I speak clearly on that stuff because it's easy to get that stuff mixed up.
I always mix up my ischial tuberosity all the time.
Right, absolutely. The tibia and fibula, things like that there too. So it has a lot of functions. So when you're running, you're striking with your knee extended, hip slightly flexed. The weight is going through the leg, and you're then powerfully pushing off the leg, contracting the hamstring as you're coming back, and then the knee then further bends to get it going forward more to clear the foot so you're not tripping over yourself. And then on top of that too, as you're striking on the opposite side, let's say, for example, your right leg is up in the air, you're taking a strike with the left leg, that hamstring is eccentrically contracting. So what that means is it's accepting a load, it's lengthening under tension, and then it has to quickly turn and concentrically contract and push you forward and then bend the leg, excuse me, the knee, so that you can then clear the foot. It all happens very rapidly, and it's something you really don't think about. But you're always asking the muscle to lengthen, contract, which is by definition what a muscle does. However, you start trying to go full speed, things can fail quickly after that. And I noticed a lot of times with the Teron Johnson injury, which we'll get into in a little bit, with the Matt Milano injury, we'll get into briefly. All the other ones, it happens with the deceleration or quick turning, where guys have to change direction quickly. So that muscle is trying to slow down, and then you get a tear, minor one most of the time, sometimes more severe, because the muscle just can't control the tension and something gives. Just like any material, eventually something's going to just give. And that's what goes back to the making the hamstrings so tricky, because you're asking so much of that muscle there, and it's such a vital part in walking and running and everything else that goes into it. It's just something that it needs to do a lot. And if something fails, then that's where you're trying to get everything moving back in one simple pattern, and it's just not always as simple as that. So I'm going to take a breath for a second, and then we're going to go into Matt Milano. So Matt Milano, going into that, he was trying to chase down the Titans tight end, John O. Smith, on that only really big play of the game for the Titans. And he was doing great. And then you could tell he was starting to try to cut to his right to try to get a bad angle if he needed to tackle him. I can't remember who tackled Smith, but you saw very briefly that
I think it was
Milano
Saran Neal caught him.
Yeah, he's been awesome lately. After the first game, he frankly sucked. So but you can see him starting to try to change his angle and slow down a little bit, and that's where I saw him grab at the left hamstring, slow down, kind of work it out a little bit. He was in for one more play, and then nothing really happened, but he signaled to come off, realizing, hey, something's going on there. So with his timeline, I could see him missing Miami. I could see him possibly missing the Eagles. The reason I think he might miss the Eagles is because that might depend on weather, because you figure bye week is 1 week, Miami's 2 weeks. Eagles, depending on how the weather is, depending on how he feels, might miss that. He should come back in time for the Redskins game based off of what I was saying before. Most guys miss 2 or 3 weeks with the hamstring. To add on to that, he did have hamstring issues his rookie year early in the season against, I believe, the Panthers, and then he missed the playoff game during the game in Miami because he suffered a hamstring strain. But I don't believe any of that caused what it is now. It's just circumstance and extreme coincidence.
And one more, Hammy. Obviously, Taron Johnson is now coming off multiple games as well, and someone that honestly, sadly, has missed 9 of the last 10 games because he missed the last 5 of last year, played week 1 this year, and then has missed the next 4. And someone that our concerns before were we loved the fact that he played bigger than his size, kind of threw caution to the wind and was just laying the hammer down from as a nickel corner. And I was a little worried about the sustainability of his shoulder, constantly making those big hits. Now it's lower body, goes in there week 1. I like that they're cautious. I like that was 4 weeks. This bye week is 5 weeks. I'm hopeful that we see him here. I think the limited participant and the testing before the game that looked similarly in line to Devin Singletary gives me some hope. Do I have reason for that hope? And do you think we'll start to see Taron Johnson back here?
I think you definitely have reason for that hope. I mean, 4 weeks is definitely more than enough time for it. I think he still did suffer what I believe to be grade 1. It looked like he was starting to get ready to come back. I saw that in video from the past few weeks. He was looking good. I wonder if he didn't have some type of setback, because it went like radio silent with Johnson for a while. Like, you always heard the updates about Devin Singletary, and you never heard anything about Johnson. It was like, okay, what's going on there? The Titans game, it was definitely weather related. I believe that after the bye, he should come back. And if Roger Goodell is listening, I believe that he should allow Johnson to take some steroids, because that guy needs to bulk up in order to last in the NFL. He's a great player, but he throws his body around with reckless abandon. And if he doesn't find a way to bulk up or something, it's just he's not going to be able to sustain the type of play he needs to in order to stay in the league here. So, hey, Roger, listen.
Yeah, they got at least give him something. Give him some creatine. I don't know what it is.
Right.
Something to let him bulk up a little bit. So it's interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of run through the injuries with us here. One other kind of high level question that I have, just kind of asking, when fans saw the enormous investment that the Bills made in their rehab facility, their workout facility, whether that's the cryotherapy, the all of the different elements that they had for heat, for workout, for the massage, the yoga, all the different areas there, that seemed like something really different and forward thinking from our side. Is that something you're aware of is common across the NFL and the Bills were just catching up, or is that something where they've kind of taken a step ahead and maybe been a little bit more proactive than where other franchises are their heads are at?
I want to say they're a little proactive because you're always talking about, or not you, but the team and the players were always talking about how great the facility was. Indicates that the guys are coming from elsewhere. It sounds like they had some stuff like that, but they didn't have it at the level of the Bills here. I can't say the Bills are the most forward-thinking team when it came to that stuff there, but you could hear where some teams just didn't invest that kind of capital into those resources. Does it make the difference on getting back quicker? It might a little bit. At the end of the day, you still need to have your athletic trainers, physical therapists, and you still need to do the rehab and healing process. I don't care what kind of equipment you have, you still need to do the work to get better. But having the sleep pods, the hyperbaric chambers, I think those are the same things, the cryotherapy, the space to work out in definitely plays a part in it because guys might be more engaged in, hey, our owners gave us stuff they need to get better. I better put the work in because I remember hearing like guys like Reggie Ragland wouldn't show up for rehab or wouldn't put the work in, and you see guys just not coming back on time. So if the people that are employing you give you every resource to get better and do the best of your job, why wouldn't you want to get in there and use all those pieces of equipment and resources available to you, perform the best that you can?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the kind of analogies that I had heard was that I wouldn't look to this from a benefit standpoint of all of a sudden getting back earlier, but that maybe avoiding recurrence in being more informed that the team's invested a lot in the sports science side of things from the analytics. I know they do a fair amount with the body tracking where they're
Yes.
showing, hey, how fast are they moving in practice? And then they know genuinely, are they actually all the way back up to 100%? And that I think a lot of that investment is making more informed decisions. So when the guys come back, they're more confident that, hey, no, they're ready to really come back here. And that it may not be an investment that, oh, that's going to get us guys back earlier. It's that when they come back, they're actually ready and we're going to get the full benefit of their value on the field. Is that something that kind of checks out for what you've heard?
Absolutely. I had interviewed Reed Ferguson, the long snapper, back in late May, and he touched on briefly some of the stuff that they have available and some of the things that he uses from week to week to try to get his body ready. And he's using everything available to him so that he can maximize himself there. So I know that all the other guys are doing that for the same, and just the more that they can have, it's not to get back quicker. It's just to get back more effectively. And then, like I said before, you're not seeing guys deal with recurrent injuries. Like I said, outside AJ Gaines, which I think came back a little bit too soon back in his first season with us, I don't think I've seen any guys suffer the same injuries over and over again because they're trying to rush back or they're not fully prepared.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And that's what I'm looking to. That's what I'm using as my barometer of success in this investment is a reduction in the recurrence of injuries, not having people come back too early and not pushing it, that they're able to make more informed decisions. So I'll be curious to see that, especially now. The ones that I think you see more often are the soft tissue ones. So are we going to be smart with Robert Foster, Taron Johnson, Devin Singletary, now Matt Milano, in that I'm hopeful we see that they're going to know, hey, based on our tracking mechanisms, their movement in practice, we can see that you're getting back to full burst, full explosion, ready to go. We now feel good endorsing you to be back out there and know that we can do that in good conscience. So that's certainly where I'm looking to kind of measure this.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's 100% true. And I know that too, listening to Dr. Chow, I mean, if you haven't listened to his podcast, it's great. I learn a lot of stuff, which I know that I can pass on to you guys there too. But it always comes down to front office staff, the player, and then the medical staff. So no one is ever making a unilateral decision. You know, some people can push more than others. Like the player is always going to want to push to get back, from what I've been told, but no one's ever be forced to play. So it's always a three-headed monster, as Dr. Chow put it. So if they feel good about you're testing out well, the outcome measures are looking good, and you want to come back and play, then let's do it. But if something doesn't look right, they're not going to expose them to further injury.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. So thank you for your time this week. I think this is really valuable to kind of give us that level set of where we stand. Obviously, it does seem kind of fortunate now in hindsight that we have the injury, report coming out at the same time that you're growing at the same time that we're hitting this bye week that, having that many players, 10, 11, 12 players being out there, I'm certainly happy we have this little bit of a break here to get everybody back right and go on an impressive stretch run. One more time, where can the people find your work and maybe what's something you have coming up they can look forward to?
I'm at bangedupbills.com, on Twitter at bangedupbills, on Facebook bangedupbills, on Reddit bangedupbills. So type it in, you're gonna find me somehow. So I don't find myself hiding on the internet for this for that there. Like I said before, I do some work for Rumblings. I'm gonna go in a little more detail with some of the things that we discussed tonight with the offensive and defensive side of the ball with regards to injuries. So that's the stuff coming up. And then I just always am thinking of different ideas to try to get unique content out there. And I feel that my stuff is more unique than others because not many people can do what I do. And that's not saying bragging about it, but it's just not every physical therapist is having the knowledge base nor the time to go in and do all this stuff and focus so much on one team. So I'm glad that I have A, the fandom, and B, the knowledge to give to the fans so that you guys can know more what's going on instead of just saying, oh, so-and-so's out the hamstring, they're getting babied. And it's like, well, no, that's not the case. And, but also final thought is it's amazing the depth we have now. And we've not had that in so many years because guys go down, we just keep moving along. Like I could elaborate on more, but that's exactly what it is. And that's great to finally see.
Yeah, I think that the cliche you always hear of next man up sounded good, but before we had injuries that it was crippling, and that just sunk us for the game, for the potentially the rest of the season, and that obviously the time and effort that not people give Brandon Bean a lot of credit, but really a lot of that shakes down to Joe Shane. Dan Morgan runs the pro side of the personnel department, and that they're always out there making sure that we're bringing in that right guy, churning the bottom of the roster, churning and using the practice squad intelligently. I know, when we had Sal Capaccio on, it was talking about how the Bills have a different approach of the practice squad. It's not just a long-term investment, project kind of shot in the dark. They're using that as the 54th to 63rd man on the roster, and that if you're on there, you could be ready to get called up. And they're not using that just for long-term projects for people. They want guys who are going to be able to come in and step into play. And we've also seen that in their approach to some long-term people, that Adrian Waddle is a one-year contract, but they put him on the IR, and that they're working towards that. To me, that means there's an interest in bringing him back next year. Sonoris Perry was someone who was released on an injury settlement, but was now just brought back. That gives me some thoughts of I haven't seen EJ Gaines signed with anyone else. If we see a long-term designation here that, hey, or a recurrence, say, that we see Taron Johnson come back out here, ends up, getting a more serious hamstring injury, I could see them reaching out to someone like EJ Gaines. And I like the way that they're setting up those backup plans, giving themselves options, being able to work through that. And it's such a welcome sight from what we've seen historically to be able to have, what I think, and, Ron commented on in the chat here, one of the deepest rosters in the NFL. And that, maybe we don't have the Aaron Donald and the Saquon Barkley and the Julio Jones elite at the top end. I think we have one of the best bottom ends of the roster in the NFL with legit NFL talent too deep across the board. And that is something we haven't had in a long, long time.
The beautiful, beautiful thing.
All right. Well, thank you for your time tonight, Kyle. Thank you guys in the chat. This has been awesome. I know I put out a little bit of information earlier. We saw some different folks. Dan Buchanan was a player that got released by the Buccaneers today. He's a guy that I really like coming out of college, and that was that prototypical player at that kind of hybrid safety linebacker, big nickel. So I put out a thread on him and some information. He's had a rough go of it in Tampa Bay, was really excellent in the Cardinals. I'm curious how much that comes into play of I know there was some speculation that he rushed to come back from injury, or that he just wasn't the right fit. So that's someone I could see the Bills kind of kicking the tires on, depending on the timeline for Corey Thompson and some of the other severity for Matt Milano. I think that that's an interesting play. Other than that, obviously, we saw the trade of Zay Jones. You know, a lot of you guys saw what was out there. Aaron and I talked about it after the game. When you go into the point that, you know, Duke Williams plays 50 snaps and Zay Jones plays one, you know, I know Aaron spent a lot of time being able to lay out the timelines that, hey, guys, Zay Jones isn't as bad as what you guys are making it out to be. The writing was on the wall. You see 50 snaps to one. That simply is what it is. And that obviously we're excited for Duke Williams and what he did. We wish nothing but the best to Zay Jones. I think he was a good partner and a good part of the team here, and I don't wish any ill will upon him. I hope he's successful with the Raiders, other than when they play the Bills, and wish him all the best. And now we're ready to move forward with the team we have here. I don't know that I anticipate any other big moves. You know, some of the names that are out there, people want us to, you know, I believe Bill Barnwell talked about the Bills should make an offer for Melvin Gordon with TJ Yeldon and a draft pick. People have talked about Trent Williams coming out of Washington, speculated about AJ Green and other players like that, Emmanuel Sanders. I don't think it's out of the question. I would be surprised. I think that we have some guys that are basically like trading for talent, that when you re-add or are able to have Tyler Kroft come in and be inserted into your offense, Devin Singletary, I think that brings a lot to the table. I think having a two tight end set of Dawson Knox and Tyler Kroft is really exciting to be able to have those things. So I think that's very similar to trading for a player, but I won't be shocked if we see another move from Brandon Beane, but I'm going to say that I think it's less than 50-50 that we may lean on the guys that we have here. You could see some churn at the bottom of the roster with a guy like a Deion Buchanan to come in at especially a spot we're now seeing ourselves a little bit thin, but we'll see where this goes through. We may do a show here this weekend. I'm working on a couple more interviews, might bring in some special guests to do something. Otherwise, you'll probably see us next on the Wednesday preview show next week, getting ready for the Dolphins. Hopefully getting us here to 5-1 and continuing on the path that we're going. But thank you tonight, Kyle, for jumping on the show. Any last thoughts for the fans before we close it out?
I got a million thoughts, but I say go read bangedupbills.com. Go check out Buffalo Rumblings, where I get more work coming out. I love coming on the show. I love listening. So thank you for having me on tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Appreciate everybody in the chat. It was a great time tonight. You will hear more from us as we go forward, but you've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.